Ladies and gentlemen, welcome your next speaker. Put your hands together and please welcome Miss Kat Boyd.
Hi. Thanks very much for inviting me today. My name's Kat, and I've been involved in the Radical Independence Campaign, which is a broad coalition of pro-independence activists. Some people in political parties, some people in no parties, some people who've never even voted before in their lives. And the reason we set it up was that we felt we needed a vehicle where we could go out and try and convince as many people as possible that a yes vote wasn't just a vote for Scotland, but it was a vote that could transform their lives as well. And I've been doing a lot of meetings and a lot of debates, and I started to open my debate by being quite open about the fact that I'm a socialist. And the reason I started doing that is because I did a debate recently in East Kilbride where I got outed as a socialist by a Labour Party MP, which I think probably tells you something about Labour politics. But for me, this isn't a debate that's defined by nations or by political parties, but rather a desire for change. And it's not really a debate about borders or flags, but about people's lives and about people's futures. And when I'm doing lots of different meetings and things like that, I try and remain focused. And the way I try and focus myself is by thinking of this same question that I keep asking myself over and over again. And it's not whether Scotland should become an independent country. It's more than that. And for me, it's what outcome in the referendum will best further the interests of ordinary people in Scotland and beyond. And the independence debate for me, it represents an opportunity that the 18th of September presents a chance. And it's a small opening in a system that has brought misery and despair for so many. It's a small gap in a system of politics that represents privilege, that represents the already rich and powerful. And I think that a yes vote opens up that gap wider. It wedges it open and gives voice, and a renewed voice, to those who are against war, seeking an alternative to austerity, and looking towards an alternative vision of society that's run in the interests of the many. And I want to start by saying, and sometimes it feels like a bit of a mad thing to say, but I think it's important to have this blunt honesty in the debate, and that's that Britain has failed. Britain's failed my generation, it's failed generations that came before, and it will continue to fail generations that come next. And it's failed in 3 ways, and those ways are economically, socially, and politically. And for me, I didn't get involved in politics during the referendum. My political education began, even though I didn't realise it at the time, in 1997. I was 11 years old in 1997. And my mum and dad are both still members of the Labour Party. But in 1997, I have a real clear memory of my dad when Tony Blair got into power. And I remember it so clearly, and I remember him the next day just being so overjoyed and full of jubilation and saying, you know, the good guys won. This is it. This is when things really start to change. And so quickly, after Blair's New Labour settled into Westminster, that government came to represent something very, very different. And then that's when I really got involved in politics, 11 years ago, when we saw the skies of Baghdad lighting up orange with bombs, and we saw young people sent off to fight in an illegal war. And it was during that time that many of us became internationalists for independence. Britain has long had an obsession with military power, which has led not only to countless wars, to staggering deaths of civilians, but also to the deaths of economic conscripts, young working class people sent off to fight in wars that preserve the interests of the rich. And that gap that I was talking about that opens up with a yes vote, for me, that's about an independent Scotland being able to shape the world stage so that we stand as a nation for peace and not for war. But today we're 11 years on from then, and we've got another government And that's a government that's still intent on waging war, and the war that they are waging is against ordinary people. And I said Britain's failed economically. Britain is one of the most unequal societies in the developed world. The entire economic structure of Britain is failing, and Scotland's got a unique opportunity to break from an economy run on debt and speculation. The British state itself is inseparable from the greed of the City of London. London's machinery of financial accumulation and profit extraction is unstable and is unproductive. And for the last 3 decades, that economic model that every party is committed to, it takes the wealth that's created by ordinary people all over the UK. It takes the wealth that's created in Liverpool, in Aberdeen, in Glasgow, and it takes it and it pulls it down to one central point, to the City of London. And it is that economic model that only benefits the rich. And there's something that Tony Benn said. Tony Benn was a big influence on me, particularly during the anti-war movement. And it was a speech that he made years ago. It was during the retirement of Thatcher. So that gives you an indication of how long ago that was. And in that speech, he talked about how Britain has an utter contempt for skill. That's the phrase that he uses, an utter contempt for skill. And we still have that. That still exists in British politics today. There is a contempt for making things, for being productive, for having skill. Finance capital in the City of London dominates our economic structure. Under the Union, this will continue, and if we vote no, it will continue. No Westminster party has a plan for restructuring the economy in favour of ordinary people. And that economic model goes along with a particular ideology, and that ideology is part of the greatest lie that I think has ever been told, and that's the trickle-down effect, that trickle-down economics would somehow work for us, that the wealth of the super rich, that would be reinvested and it would rise all of us up. And I think we only need to look around. We only need to look around. A housing crisis, 1 in 3 children in Glasgow living in poverty, a life expectancy in some parts of Glasgow that's 54 years old. That is the true nature of the trickle-down effect. And that lie is being more and more exposed every day. And if we don't move now, and if we don't vote yes now, and we don't go out and convince as many people as possible to vote yes, then that path of economic failure will continue. And of course, you do get some people that say, we need to remain united, and we'll achieve more together, that we're better together. But united, we've achieved, in past decades, an unheard of regression in equality and social justice. And on social justice, I said that Britain had failed socially. And again, that's very easy for us to see. Britain has the 3rd highest housing costs in Europe, the highest rail prices in Europe. It is the 2nd worst for fuel poverty. Britain's elderly are the 4th poorest in the European Union. Britain has some of the least happy children in the developed world and some of the worst child poverty in the industrialised world. And it has also failed politically. And I want to explain a little bit what I mean by that, because I think it's an important part of the debate. And you hear all the time, particularly in the right-wing media, where they talk about the public, what the public think, the idea of public opinion. So I looked into this, and it was some YouGov polls that were done of people across the UK. And it showed something very interesting. It showed that 12-to-1 people were against the privatisation of the NHS. 67% were in favour of a public Royal Mail. 66% backed rail renationalisation. And 68% wanted the nationalisation of all major energy companies. Yet no party represents those views at Westminster, not now and not in any plausible future. And the conclusion that I have reached is that it's the systems of so-called democracy in Britain that makes UK politics right-wing, not shifts in public opinion. The British electoral system itself rules out any space for other voices, for dissenting voices, and instead it pits the Labour Party against the Tories in a never-ending battle for middle-class, Middle England swing votes. Those constituencies, those swing constituencies that the parties focus on so much, has caused the normalisation of debates on immigration, for example. This is a failure of British politics, that it shuts out ordinary people's voices. And I want to give you a real-life example of this. And it's through the Radical Independence campaign, and we go out canvassing, and we go to people's doors, and we just ask them, have you thought about how you're going to vote in the referendum? And it was during one of these canvassing sessions that this guy's door was knocked, and he answered, and the conversation was going on, and he was talking about, he was swaying towards yes. And as the conversation developed, he said, you know, no one's been to ask me about politics or what I thought about the way things were for over a decade. That's a real-life example of the failure of British politics, and it is absolutely shameful. This system exerts constant right-wing pressure on all of the parties. All calculations rest on these Middle England votes, and it secures UK politics and its overwhelming attachment to right-wing agendas. We've got a system that breeds career politicians at Westminster, where they openly say that there's no point in trying to win over those people like the guy I'm talking about with canvassing. There's no point in trying to win over the disenfranchised because their votes don't really matter anyway. And these things that I'm talking about, the failures of Britain, they're linked directly to what I want to challenge with my yes vote. And what I want to challenge are the things like the City of London, the unelected forces at Westminster, the idea that an accident of birth guarantees social outcomes. To have true independence, I think these are the things that need to be challenged. And someone that's always been a big inspiration to me, a lot of his work, particularly during this referendum, is Jimmy Reid, who was obviously born here in Govan. And in his speech on alienation that he made in Glasgow in the 1970s, and I've quoted him so many times when I'm thinking about independence, but in that speech he said that government by the people, for the people, means nothing unless we have full economic control over our own destiny. And what he's talking about there is he's talking about a type of quiet revolution. He's talking about a quiet revolution against powerlessness, against fear, against alienation. He's talking about taking back control of our lives, that the choices we make can actually can make a difference. And independence for me is a revolt against alienation. And this is part of where the name Radical Independence comes from, because you know when we set it up, we didn't really think about what impact that the name would have. And a few people have said to me, you know, why he's called that? I think radical's a bit off-putting. And to be honest, you know, some of our policies aren't particularly radical. They're just ideas about social justice and spending money on housing and education rather than on nuclear weapons. But the name Radical Independence is important in this point that I want to make. And it's about the word radical and what that means. And actually, its original meaning is reforming the root. That's what it means, radical. That's the origins of the words. And that notion of reforming the root is linked to our fundamental understanding that to get rid of Westminster, to get rid of the weed, we need to get rid of the root, and we need to pull it up by its roots. And those roots are inherited privilege, finance capital, the monarchy, and militarism. In September, for once, we've got real hope, a real chance to change the path that we're on. And for the first time in my lifetime, I feel like I finally got something to vote for. Austerity at home, a war on the poor at home, and war abroad is not the best that we can expect. And see that jubilation that I was talking about that my dad felt in '97? And when I've done other meetings, people have said to me, I felt that too. Like, I felt that sense of finally the good guys have won. That jubilation, in some ways, it's a feeling that I envy, just even for that moment, for that one day that people had it. It's a feeling that I envy. Because unless we vote yes, we will never, ever have that feeling from a Westminster election again. There are no good guys at Westminster to win. But instead of just feeling envious about that, instead of just feeling angry about that, I recognise that we've got an incredible opportunity. We've got a greater chance to vote yes and to shape a new nation and to change the way that we do politics so that we don't share that experience of the months and years after that election where a government sold its principles down the river. And what I always say to people when I'm talking to them and they're already a yes voter, and I think it's an important question to keep asking ourselves again, is do we have what it takes to win? Not just the referendum, but to win Scotland for its people. And that's what is at the core of the Radical Independence campaign. It lies the idea that this isn't about mainstream parties or politics as normal. It's the idea that people can make politics. And that, for me, has been one of the greatest weapons against the No campaign. The idea that the No campaign seems to run on, their story that they tell, it's all about fear. It's all scare stories. People refer to it all the time as Project Fear. And the fear of the No campaign that they try and instill in people that somehow everything will fall apart, Scotland, it'll be a disaster if you vote yes. Well, I'm standing here and I'm saying in all honesty that I do have a fear. I have one fear, that in years to come, there'll still be children born in Scotland who are deemed born to fail, that there'll still be pensioners who die every year of fuel poverty, that there'll still be families torn apart by joblessness, and that there will be generation after generation of young people who feel like they have no say in their future. I have no fear of an independent Scotland. I'm only afraid of more of the same. And I think it's important also to let the No campaign, to let them understand that every time they try to tell us that this isn't financially viable, that a yes vote isn't financially possible, that you don't have enough money, because of course we do, Everyone knows that. You only have to look a little bit into the statistics to see, of course it is. But more than that, it's a shameful tactic, because since when did politics become about how rich you were as a nation and not about how the wealth is distributed amongst its citizens? And it is people who need to be at the centre of politics. And it's us in this room who are voting yes, who have the potential for change. And I want to finish on this, and it's the great thing about the movement for yes. And it's that we're building a movement that's bigger than the vote. And I want to explain what I mean by that. And of course, we're doing it physically, because this debate, I have no doubt about it, is being watched from all over the world. People in England and Wales, they're looking to us saying, vote yes and show us that something else is possible. But more than that, our movement's bigger than just the vote. Because at the end of it all, you know, we're doing these meetings. It seems the campaign has just exploded in the last 8 months. And there's meetings happening up and down the country, from East Coast to West Coast, from the Highlands to the borders to the islands. But when you strip it all back, the referendum is just one day. That's all it is. It's just one day. And I know that when I go to the ballot box, there's only 2 options on the paper. You know, it doesn't say no yes, or radical independence vision of yes, or socialist vision of yes. But that's the moment when it becomes real for me. That's when it actually becomes real and exciting, because I have every faith that the people in Scotland will shape the future of a new nation. And the message that we want to give out as the Radical Independence Campaign, the message that we think is important to tell people, and it's really to get the sense of urgency about this debate, that Britain is for the rich, Britain is for the already wealthy, and it grows the gap between rich and poor. Britain is for the already powerful, with no way of re-empowering the disenfranchised. Britain is for those who have and shuns those who don't. Britain is rigged, and it is not in favour of ordinary people. Our movement has a chance. We've got a real chance, a huge opportunity on September the 18th and the months beyond. And it's not just to make a new nation, and not just to make a new Scotland, but to, most importantly, to make it ours. Thanks.